All right. And then someone can hold me accountable and remind me after class on Slack to post it, please. So let's go to the REPL. If you ever can't see in the back of the room, you can just say the word enhance, and I'll try to make it bigger. Is that good? Or enhance? All right, cool. If I don't hear enhances, I'm just going to assume that everybody can see perfectly. So functions. Functions are in every single language, and they're like an integral part of every single language. And it's actually a new data type. So now we've expanded our data types. We have strings, we have numbers, we have booleans, which can be either true or false. We have, what else do we have? Arrays, and now we have functions. Next class, or in 2 classes, we're going to have a last one called objects. But now, we're just going to focus on functions. Functions are super useful as a programmer because they take these massive chunks of code and they split it up into small little parts. So let's look at one of those small little parts. I declare my function with the keyword function, and then I give it a name. And then I have 2 of these opening and closing parentheses. And that's just part of the syntax of creating a function. After I declare my function, I have a block of code. So just like in an if statement, the things between these curly braces are blocks of code. And then if I run my program, nothing happens, right? Because all I did is I created a function. I didn't call it. I'm not using it anywhere else. I just created it. So nothing is ever going to get run inside of it unless I call it, or invoke it, in other words. So I can actually call it by typing the name of the function in and adding those 2 parentheses on it. So now I'm going to call it, and then it's going to execute line 9 and 10. And I'll prove it. So console log executing line 13. Console log, well, by the hello there, you'll see it's in lines 9 and 10. So it executes line 13 even though 9 and 10 were declared above it because they're wrapped inside of a function. Now, the next thing about functions is you can reuse them. You can call them multiple times. This is the biggest advantage of functions. I can call this twice, oops, and it's going to execute twice. It's going to say hello there, and then I call it again in line 14, and it's going to say hello there. If I had to print a bunch of stars there to separate them, it'll print the stars in between. This is really useful because there might be a really cool piece of code that you write that has to be used in like 5 different places. Or there could be a really cool piece of code that someone wrote on the internet who you don't know, and it could be used millions of places. But being able to like kind of capture it in these little pieces is the biggest benefit of functions. I could call it a whole bunch more times, right? There's no limit because I'm never changing what's going on in here. Every time I pass these parentheses, I'm calling it. Now, if I was to leave off the parentheses, it's returning a function. So this is saying, hey, okay, you gave me a function. Or if I was to console log it, it's going to say, cool, you gave me a function, but you didn't use those parentheses. And if you don't use those parentheses, then it never gets called. So here I console log in line 13. It came out function greet. So nothing happened. Now if I was to say console log greet, it's no longer a function because I've called the function here. It printed hello there from 9 and 10, and then it printed undefined. Because in a second we're going to learn that undefined is what was returned from the statement. What else is really cool about functions? They take parameters. They take arguments. Those 2 words are going to be used interchangeably. So a parameter to a function goes inside the curly, what are those, parentheses, goes inside the parentheses? Yeah, goes inside the parentheses. And then you can use that in your function. So now the only thing is, when I call it, I have to actually give it an argument. I can't call it without one. So I have to say hello, and now I'm passing this argument in. That argument's going to come in line 8, and it's going to be added in line 9. And it says hello Will. Now the cool thing about functions is I can reuse that code and every single time it's going to add the new name to it. I don't have to hard code hello Will, hello Will, hello Will every single time, right? I can greet Dave and I can greet Grandma all in sequence. Hello Will, hello Dave, hello Grandma. So that's the benefit of writing functions, is you can pass in arguments. The next thing that I'm going to go over is the function in lines 17 through 20 on mine. So I'm going to comment out my earlier function, and I'm going to travel down to this uncommented out function. So this is a pretty simple function that I wrote, which takes the average of two numbers. It also takes two input parameters. It's saying, okay, when you call me, give me x and give me y. So if I run this, it's still there, average is there, but nothing happens. It's not called yet. So in line 21, I say, okay, give me the average of 2 and 6. And that average is 4. And 4 is what I get. So, but then I can use that same, just like I did before, I can use that same average function multiple times, and I don't have to rewrite this code time and time again. But wait, how am I getting 3? Earlier I was just printing stuff. So what I'm doing in line 19 is I'm using the return keyword for the first time. So functions have inputs, that's what x and y are, stuff that I'm providing to the function. And they also have outputs, stuff that the function is returning. So in line 19, I am returning a value. I am giving back to the user who called this. Oops, that's the wrong language. My returned average is what ends result out of this. So if I'm going to console log returned average, what's going to happen in my code? Average 2 to 6 is going to execute first. We know it's going to return 4. It's going to go through here. It's going to say, okay, 2 plus 6 is 8. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And it's going to return 4 in line 19. That 4 is going to be stored. It's going to be returned from here and stored in this variable, line 22. And then I can just print out line 22. And it should say 4. And there it is. And that's just a value, right? I can do stuff with that too. It's not untouchable. Now that it's returned from average, anything can use it. Right? If I wanted to do the average of two numbers, I could say, okay, give me the average of 1 and 5. In line 22, give me the average of 2 and 6. In line 23, give me the average of 1 and 5. So this should be 4, I'm thinking, and this should be 3, I'm thinking. Then, give me the new average, calling that same function of 4, which I got, and 3, which I got. They're all just numbers now. They're new variables that I can pass into that same function. What did I do? Oh, I just got to print it. And we get 3.5. You could get really kind of messy, which as we're wont to do, and you could say take the average of the average and the average of this average. That can get pretty messy, but it's going to give you the same thing. How JavaScript's going to work, it's going to execute this. So we'll print it to make sure it works. JavaScript's going to execute this and say, okay, you returned 4. Then JavaScript is going to execute this and be like, okay, cool, you returned 3. Then JavaScript is going to execute this, store 3.5 in total average, and print that to the screen. Return statements, though. Normally, functions have like 1 or 2 of them. And the first return statement that actually gets hit is the one that turns back. So let's say I called this average function, and I say 1 and 5. So the average of that is 3. If I only have lines 18 and 20, it's going to say, okay, 1 plus 5, 6 divided by 2 is 3. Nope, it's not. We just proved that. However, if I put a return statement in, and one return statement is before the other, then here in line 20, I never get executed. It's never going to get run. Once JavaScript hits that return, it's like, I'm done. I'm done with this function. I'm not going any further. This is it. So I called average with 1 and 5. I calculated the sum, but then I never really got down to here because I just returned 10. And this line, I never get executed, never gets printed. So let's do this. Let's write a function, and we'll do it together in class. Write a function that returns a dog age from a human name. What would be like a good name for our function? In dog years. I like it because it's descriptive. What would be our input parameter? Like, what do we give to this function? I think I saw here. I heard somebody say. I heard somebody say age. I heard somebody say human years. Say that again. Numbers. So that's a good question. Which of these, age, human years, or numbers, is the most descriptive for our function? Yeah, I like human years because then I know. Okay, let's say I don't even know what dog years is, but I'm going to work on this other person's code. I know exactly what's supposed to go in there. It could be it doesn't have to be age of, a raccoon. It's translating human to dog years. So I kind of like human years. That's just, they're gonna work the same, but it's just a way of making your code more readable so that others can work on it too. All right, how do we calculate human years to dog years? 7 dog years to 1 human year. So we're going to say dog years equals human years times 7. Human years divided by 7? So if we say a dog, and this is how we check our work, right? That's the beautiful thing about functions. We can just check our work. And we console log the age out. If a human is 5 years old, how many is that in dog years? It should be 35, right? Because dogs are, 7 times older than humans. It's undefined. What are we missing in lines 26 through 28? Yeah, we're missing a return statement. We never said, what do we want to give it? So let's return our dog years that we calculated. 0.71. So human years times 7 is actually going to be our dog years. But that's our way of checking it along the way to make sure we got it right. Why do we need a return statement? That's a good question. The result of this function in line 31, we're storing that in age. So the function in dog years has to say, okay, I'm done, and here is what I want you to store. And if we don't have anything, then JavaScript has no idea what value. Like, what if we do, raccoon years here, and it's human years times 4. JavaScript doesn't know which one of these it wants you to return. It's not like a brain reader. So you tell it, you know what? I definitely want to return dog years. That is what I'm storing. That's a great question. And now we console log the age, and we're correct. That's 35. That's one way that we checked our work. Okay. What happens if I don't give it a number, right? I said in line 26, give me an argument. But now I'm saying, I'm not giving you an argument. The lack of thing that what is it going to be? Let's see what happens first of all. Does anybody know what I'm actually passing in now? It's giving me nan. What is human years now when I'm executing this function? If I console log it, what is it? I passed in, so if I pass in 5, and I console log in line 27, it should say, here I go, human years is human years. So I pass in 5, it should say human years is 5, dog years is 35. If I pass in nothing, what is that going to say in line 27? Let's see. Human years is undefined. So that's that keyword I think a lot of you have been seeing in your scripts lately. And what does it mean? Undefined in JavaScript is like the absence of everything else. It means that you didn't really give me anything. It's not like false, right? It's not explicitly saying this is wrong. It's just saying, I have no idea what this is. It's literally undefined. You have not defined it and given it to me. And then what happens if I pass in undefined, which I just printed out in line 27, then it's trying to do undefined times 7. And when you do undefined times 7, that's where it's saying, hey, you know what? This is not a number. This is NaN. And then you're still returning not a number. And your program's still thinking, hey, that's the right age. But it's not the right age. It broke way up here in line 28. So if you want to get one step more advanced, something you can do is say, did they give me a valid input? In line 27, you can say, if human years is equal to undefined, I want to do something else. Else, I want to do something. Or you can even get a little better and you can say, if what I got in human years was a number, then I'm cool with it. Then I want to do my whole dog year calculator. If it's not, and you can actually tell what you want to happen. So first, let's see if we actually still run that first part, which is this if statement, if I pass in a real number. We passed in human years. It was because it returned the dog years. If it didn't, it would have returned something random. Or probably it would have returned undefined, because we never told it what we're returning. And if you don't tell it, it's going to be like, all right, you're probably undefined. So what would be something to return here in this else statement? Like what, if somebody gives us a number, or somebody gives us nothing and we wanted a number, what should we return? Should we just like make up a value and say, all right, just give them 1? Is that valid? Because it's going to happen, right? I passed in something that wasn't a number, so it skipped over this if block. It got to this else block, and I just returned 1. That worked. There's something else we could do. We could say, okay, I'm just going to return undefined. Someone else can deal with it. That's fair. And then age in line 38 is going to be undefined. You could do something real crazy like return, hey, you idiot, give me a number. And say, I want to explicitly return this and tell them, hey, you idiot, give me a number. And in line 38, it's going to print out what I gave back to them. You can get just one bit more complicated, and you can say the whole program stop working. If you don't give me what I want, stop working. I want to throw an error. And it should show up red on the screen. Hey, you gave me a number. These errors that you're seeing in JavaScript, someone's actually gone in there at times and said, I didn't get what I wanted, so I'm throwing an error. That's what an error is. You can use that. You can even, which my favorite case would be, is just return the error. So now it doesn't break your code or anything, but now people know, hey, there's an error. And it didn't show up red because it's not broken the code. I didn't throw it. I just gave it to them. Said, hey, here's an error. You can make this just more descriptive, right? Invalid input. Wrong parameter type. And you can make that super descriptive. This type of advanced error returning is probably a few weeks or months away. But what's really important out of this example is the idea that you can have an if statement and you can return multiple times inside a function. But only the first return that it hits is valid. Only the first return that it hits is valid. Any questions on that before we move on? Yeah?
Why did you, when you put type of human here, why did you put number in the string?
As opposed to what?
As opposed to saying number. Why is it in
Yeah. So when I call type of, it's like, okay, what is this right here? And it says, here is the type of it in a string. So this type of is actually, believe it or not, a function. We've been writing it weird, but it's a function almost like this. This is essentially the function, and it returns like a string like that. That's what the function actually syntax does. So that when I want to compare it, I have to compare it against a string also. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. Next. Let's do, I'm trying to figure out if we have time for this. Let's do this exercise on, yeah, let's do this together. Actually, no, let's do this on your own. So, nope, let's do it together. So here's going to be a function that checks if a word is a palindrome. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but we're going to write through the function to say, is this a palindrome? And so if I'm writing a function for this, a good name for it would be like, is palindrome, right? Or what would be another name? I can think of one actually. Maybe like palindrome checker. Now the first time I heard what a palindrome was, I had to Google it again, so don't feel bad if you don't know what it is. A palindrome is something that's spelled the same forward as it is backwards. So like mom is a palindrome because if you reverse it, it's also mom. Now if I was a good JavaScript developer, which I try to be at all times, I would write maybe a description of my function so that someone else doesn't have to memorize what a palindrome is. I would say palindrome checker returns true if a word is spelled the same forward as it is backwards. And I would just leave that comment there. So if someone else came through and was like, what is this? They would just be able to find it. So in order to have a palindrome spelled the same forward as backwards, what I'm going to have to do is reverse it and compare it to the original input, right? So let's do that on our own. And I'll give you all 5 minutes, and you have a question, please raise your hand. But you're going to be taking an input string, right? Checking it against yourself, and if it's the same thing, returning true. And if it's not the same thing, returning false. I'll give you 6 minutes to do this. Good luck. I'm going to keep talking as y'all are working, but feel free to ignore me because I'm going to kind of work through it slower up here. The first thing I did is Google how to reverse a string in JavaScript. That's the first thing I did. Clicked on this article. And this person here is trying to reverse my string. Okay. Split, reverse, and join. So that's saying if I have, and I can split it, I can reverse it, and I can join it. That can't be true. Say what? I'm not going to finish it. You have 3 minutes remaining. If you think you did it, try mom with an uppercase M. And that should return true. It's a palindrome. It's the same word, forward and backwards. And then if you think you did that, try something with the next exclamation point at the end of it. And ignore the exclamation point. All right. I know people are all over the place. Some have finished. Many have not. And so we're going to work through it slowly. One reason I gave the survey is I had a sense, I was trying to cram so much stuff in, I had a sense that I was going real fast. So I'm trying to slow it down and work through things together. But I'll also listen to the survey and what y'all said. So in lines 48 through 51 on my screen, I have function palindrome checker. One piece of feedback I want to give people, if you write code like this, where line 49 isn't indented, and the bracket here isn't on the next spot, it becomes so much harder to debug, and it becomes so much harder to see what's going on. So whenever especially if I'm struggling with something, bless you, whenever I'm learning something, I always try to make sure everything's on its own line, and that if I'm inside of a block, and that word is a little new, in between these two curly brackets is a block. If I'm inside the block, then everything should be indented. Just like if it was an if statement. I'm inside the block, everything's just a little indented. Okay, so I gave us this reversed. So if I say I want to give potato, now I don't really care if this is a palindrome right now, I just want to see what it prints out. So I'm passing in potato to palindrome checker. I split, I reverse, and I join, which I just Googled and found out that reversed something. And I'm going to print it to see if it reverses it. It doesn't, right? Yeah, potato's not a palindrome. So how am I supposed to reverse a string? Like this? Perfect. So now it reverses it. So now I have my reversed variable. Oops. Trying to get my indent on the right line. So now I know that I can pass something in and I can reverse it. Now what I want to do is I read what my method is, and it says returns true if a word is spelled the same forward as it is backwards. So I'm going to say if my input string is equal to what I reversed, then I want to return true, right? I want to say, yep, I got a palindrome, and I want to return true. So palindrome checker, I pass in potato. Actually, let's pass in one that I know is a palindrome, mom. It says, yep, I got a palindrome. I returned true, but nothing printed out because I didn't do anything with true. So just to make sure I check my work, on line 57, I'm going to console log pal, which is a nickname for palindrome. It's what you call your best palindrome, your pal. And it did print out true. Now I'm going to give it potato again, which I know is not a palindrome. In line 57, palindrome checker is going to enter with potato. It's going to run through lines 49 through 53. What is going to be returned to pal, and what am I going to print to the screen? Does anybody know? Shout it out if you do. Undefined. Can anyone explain why it's undefined? Yeah, I haven't told it what I'm returning. Now, if the input string is the same as reversed, then I've told it. I've said, hey, in this case, return true. But if I don't tell it, or if it doesn't pass this if condition, then it's just down here in line 54, and it's like, I'm just done. You haven't told me what to return, so I'm done. So let's verify that that assumption is correct. And it does return undefined. So down here, I have to return something. Now, in this function, what would make sense to return? False, right? You say false. If the input string is not reversed, or is reversed, is the same as it is reversed, then return true. Otherwise, return false. So now, palindrome checker with potato should return false. So even though I have a return statement up here, remember how I said 2 return statements in a row, only the first one is executed? However, the return statement in line 52 is only executed if the if statement is true. If at the top I was to return, yep, sure is, to every single palindrome that comes in, it doesn't matter. None of this code matters because it hits line 50 first. And I should print, yep, sure is. It's the same thing in line 54. If I return false and was like, hold up, actually I wanted to return true, if it hits line 54 first before it hits 55, it should be false. My boss comes the next day and she says, hey, I need you to reverse this other string. And I thought to myself, I just did a reversal in a palindrome, and now you want me to reverse another string. So she comes to me and says, I want you to check if, when you reverse a string, if it's in alphabetical order. So then I would say function, you don't have to copy all this down, so I'm going to do it fast. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to say, okay, let reversed equals, and I'm going to have that same reversal code right there. And then I'm going to say, okay, if reversed equals the same as reversed dot sort. This is checking just if it's in alphabetical order. Now the point of this is not what this function is checking, right? Does anybody know the point of this? Yeah, what do you mean? What did I use twice? Yeah. This reversed a string I copied in both places. And if I have a new function which needs to reverse a string, then I have to copy it again and again. So what I'm going to do is try to keep my code dry, which is don't repeat yourself. I'm going to create my reversal function. Function reverse string. And that's going to take an input string. Now before I write it, I'm going to write my definition. Reverse string takes in a input string and returns the reverse of it. Seems kind of obvious, but it doesn't hurt anything. Then this reversal, let reversed equals input string, and I already know how to do this because now I've written it 3 times. And I'm going to return the reversed string from it. So first I'm going to do is just make sure that makes sense. So I'm just going to console log reverse string potato. And I'm going to uncomment out these down here just for now. So the only thing that should be executing is line 52. Input string is not defined. Okay, it reverses it. So now I know my reversal function works. Now, if I am an A+ programmer, I go back in here, and I'm like, how can I reuse this? And I heard someone over there say, I can use my reversal function. Instead of doing all this reversal in here, I could say, hey, let's use that reversal function that I already used. And let's pass in that first parameter that you gave me. So now, we're going to reverse the string using a separate function, and then still use that output. And let's console log it. So potato should be false. Nope. Why is it true? Because in line 60, I'm returning true. So it doesn't matter if I think it should return false. I tell it to return true, it's going to return true. And the answer is false, and then I'll check one more, which is Hannah. And it should return true and say, yep, I got a palindrome. Any questions before we break for studio about functions, specifically around declaring functions, passing arguments, and return statements? I think all your TAs or TFs are in that room. So y'all can go ahead and migrate to your studio, and I'll go grab them.
It's all building it, doing it. Yeah.
Oh, look at you swiping the chair already.
Swiping the chair.
Right.